"You know no one is allowed in the cockpit, right?" "I do," Jack replied, eyes locked on the radar screen. "But she's about to give birth, and if I hadn't done it, we might have lost them both." Because of one deeply human decision, Jack Walters, a veteran pilot with over 30 years of flight experience, was suspended indefinitely. No hearing, no thank you. Just a curt message from the airline: the pilot has violated a serious aviation safety regulation. Just hours earlier, Jack was flying his usual night route from Colorado to Nevada. On board, a pregnant woman suddenly went into agonizing labor mid-air. Panic erupted. The cabin was too cramped for the lone nurse on board to intervene properly. In a split-second decision, Jack broke protocol. He opened the cockpit door and let the woman sit in the co-pilot seat beside him. He made an emergency landing in just 20 minutes, saving both mother and child. But instead of being praised, Jack became aviation's scapegoat. A passenger's video of the incident went viral, racking up millions of views and endless debate. Then the next morning, as Jack flew his personal aircraft, something no one could have predicted happened. Two F-16 fighter jets appeared from behind the clouds, flanking his small plane like an honorary escort. At that moment, Jack still didn't know the woman he saved was no ordinary passenger. Jack Walters, 59, is a former combat pilot who flew over 150 missions in the Middle East. After retiring from the military, he became a civilian pilot living a quiet life with his wife, who is battling stage 3 cancer. Known among his colleagues as Captain Iron Rule, Jack was a model of discipline and safety. But beneath that tough exterior was a heart scarred by loss. When confronted with a panicked pregnant woman in the middle of a stormy night, Jack was no longer the steel-hearted soldier. He became a man who chose compassion over protocol. The night flight from Denver to Reno took off on time, but the skies had other plans. A sudden low-pressure system formed, shaking the aircraft violently for the first 15 minutes. The seatbelt sign blinked red like a warning light in Jack's gut. He'd seen this turbulence before back in the Gulf. The head flight attendant rushed into the cockpit. "Captain, we have a situation. Seat 14B, a pregnant woman very far along. She's in severe pain, maybe going into labor." Jack turned. "Any doctors or nurses on board?" "One nurse, but the cabin's too tight. She can't do much." Jack glanced at the clock. Nearly 1 a.m. Reno was still 40 minutes away. "We can't wait," he thought. And then he did something he hadn't done in 35 years of flying. He unlocked the cockpit door and stepped out into a cabin filled with alarmed eyes. "Bring her up here," Jack said firmly. Everyone froze. The cockpit, a flight attendant stammered. "The co-pilot seat has a 5-point harness oxygen supply and space for the nurse to work. If not, we might lose them both." A minute later, a heavily pregnant woman was helped into the cockpit, pale, breathless, clutching the seat with trembling hands. Jack gave up his own seat, squeezed into a corner, leaving space for the nurse. "You could get fired for this," the nurse whispered. "I couldn't live with myself if I let her die over a rule," Jack replied. He radioed the tower requesting priority landing. "We have a medical emergency." The next 18 minutes were a blur of turbulence, warning alarms, and wind slamming against the fuselage. But under Jack's steady hands, the Boeing touched down on Reno's runway, just 18 minutes after the emergency call. Paramedics were already waiting. As the woman was placed on a stretcher, she grabbed Jack's hand, tears in her eyes. "If it weren't for you, my baby wouldn't have made it." Jack nodded quietly, eyes still on the controls. No one saw the tear glistening at the corner of his eye in the dark. Less than 12 hours after the emergency landing that saved 2 lives, Jack received a cold call from the airline's HR department. No concern, no gratitude. Just a statement: "Mr. Walters, due to a serious breach of cockpit security, you're suspended indefinitely pending internal investigation." Jack held the phone in silence. 30 years of flawless service, never disciplined, never off procedure. And now, for one act of compassion, it was all gone. Worse yet, a passenger had filmed the moment the woman entered the cockpit. The clip was posted online with a polarizing title: "Pilot Lets Pregnant Woman into Cockpit, Hero or Reckless Fool." Millions watched. The internet exploded. Rules are rules. If everyone made exceptions, aviation safety would collapse. He saved 2 lives. If you were that mother, you'd understand. The airline didn't defend Jack. Instead, they released a statement. "Captain Jack Walters' actions do not reflect our company's safety policies. All pilots must strictly adhere to cockpit security protocols." Jack read the statement, fingers whitening around the page. Not a word about the baby who lived. Not a word thanking him for staying calm in a life-or-death scenario. That evening, Jack returned home and said nothing to his wife. He sat for hours in the garage, staring at the old Air Force medal on the wall, once given to the pilot who never wavered by a millimeter. For the first time in years, Jack wondered, did I do the right thing? The next morning, as the first rays of sun filtered through the garage window, Jack stepped into his yard with a heavy heart. He decided to take his old Piper Cherokee for a spin around Great Salt Lake, a small personal aircraft he'd bought after retiring from the military, a piece of the sky he could still call his own. The Piper hummed in the soft morning light, gliding past snow-capped ridges. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. N154JW. This is Salt Lake Air Traffic Control. 2 military aircraft are approaching your position. Maintain altitude and remain calm. Jack furrowed his brows, barely reacting before 2 F-16 fighter jets burst through the eastern cloud line, forming a perfect triangle with his small plane. The sky thundered with the roar of afterburners. People on the ground looked up confused. Jack's grip tightened on the controls. Then a voice came through his headset. Captain Jack Walters, this is Phoenix 1. We have the honor of escorting you at the request of a very special party. Request from who, Jack asked, stunned. A pause. Then, from the commander of the Air Force and a woman named Elena Carter. Jack nearly dropped the controls. Elena Carter, that name, had barely registered when the nurse whispered it during the emergency. And now it echoed through the skies, tied to a military escort. After landing at a small civilian airport in Ogden, Jack was ushered into a VIP lounge. A man in uniform approached and handed him a thick envelope saying simply, "The woman you saved, Elena, is the wife of General Charles Carter, head of Special Operations Command. They didn't get a chance to thank you. They'd like to start now." Inside the envelope, a sonogram photo, a handwritten note, and a line that made Jack's hands tremble. "You didn't just save my wife, you saved the future of the next generation of aviators." Within days, military news outlets and national media began running headlines. The story of Captain Jack, the pilot who chose compassion over protocol. As for Jack, the man who once questioned whether he'd done the right thing, he now soared alongside fighter jets, finally certain. Some decisions don't need approval, just a heart that knows why. 3 days after the F-16 flyby tribute, Jack Walters was invited to Nellis Air Force Base for a special ceremony, the same base where he once stood as a young pilot more than 30 years ago. This time he returned not in uniform, but in a simple shirt, and with humbled eyes. On stage, hundreds of soldiers stood at attention flags, waving in the hot Nevada wind. In the front row, his wife Elaine sat in her wheelchair, eyes shining. Beside her sat a young couple, General Carter and Elena, holding their newborn, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with the Air Force insignia. When Jack's name was announced, the entire audience stood and applauded. Not politely, but solemnly, emotionally, with pride. General Carter stepped forward and presented Jack with the Civilian Military Honor Medal, a badge never before awarded to a civilian pilot. In war, our pilots are honored for bravery under fire. But today we honor a pilot brave in peace, one who chose humanity over protocol. General Carter turned to the crowd. "My wife and child are alive because of this man, and America needs more men like him." Jack couldn't hold back his tears. He gripped his wife's hand as he stepped down from the stage, speechless. He had earned medals before, but never had he felt this moved. After the ceremony, major news networks like CNN and NBC, as well as local stations, ran the story. Pilot suspended for saving lives, now honored by the military. The story went viral. The airline that had suspended Jack was pressured to release an official apology and offered him his job back. But Jack shook his head. "I don't need the job. I just need them to understand." Sometimes the heart must be heard louder than the rules. But the U.S. Air Force had another offer. They invited Jack to become a special advisor to their in-air emergency response training program, a prestigious and strategic role mentoring young pilots. Jack accepted not for fame, but because he believed. No one should be punished for saving a life. On his final day at the base, as the sun set over the tarmac, Jack stood in the control tower watching an F-16 blaze across the sky, leaving a trail of orange fire. Elaine came up beside him, gently taking his hand. "You're flying again, Jack," she whispered. He smiled, eyes still skyward. "No," he said softly. "This time, we're flying together." 1 week after the ceremony, Jack sat quietly in his garage working on his old Piper Cherokee. On the wall beside his newly framed medal hung a family photo sent by the Carters' Elena holding the baby. Below it, a handwritten note read, "For your courage and warm heart, thank you for giving my child a first chance at life." Jack read that line over and over again like a personal reminder. He was no longer a commercial pilot. No more red-eye flights, no more hours in cold briefing rooms. But he had never felt freer. His story spread across forums, Facebook groups, and newspapers nationwide. Thousands of letters, emails, and cards flooded his small home in Utah from single mothers, veterans, and everyday people who had once needed help but found none. They wrote, "You did what I wish someone had done for my mother. For the first time in years, I believe goodness still exists. My son just became a pilot. I showed him your story to teach him that sometimes morality matters more than manuals." Elaine read every letter aloud, tears trailing down her cheeks. "You didn't just save one child, Jack," she said softly. "You reminded people that we can still believe in one another." Jack looked up at the sky, the place he'd served, fought, and now finally been thanked. He didn't need a statue. He didn't need a title. For him, saving even one life, ensuring even one person wasn't left behind, was enough. Final message of the story. Sometimes kindness will cost you everything, but if you do the right thing, even when the world says you're wrong, you're still a hero in the hearts of those you saved.